This is the final reading of Chapter 1 of How to Lose a Planet, the Afro-Future Epic. He hugged himself by trying to steady his breathing. Sirens wailed in the distance. Terror dragged against his skin like fingernails. He couldn't open his eyes and he couldn't stop shaking. He felt his body full of wounds or the trickling of blood. In her last letter, Dani had described how she had been shot in the pelvis during a battle. At first, she felt no pain. She'd only thought a panic attack had overcome her and the stream of blood running down her inner thigh was urine. Crazier thing than getting shot was being kind of glad it happened, she had said. Ain't much more natural thing nowadays than getting shot, except maybe living in fear of getting shot. But now that I know what it is, I'm not so scared no more. When he realized he couldn't feel any urine, he opened his eyes and looked around. The pod's door had been shredded by bullets. Its locking mechanism was offline and throwing sparks. All the inmates lay dead. He sat up and leaned back from the morbid sight. The dead men were folded into themselves and spilling their innards like mashed cigarettes. He thought about how cold their bodies would become. He exited the bin and nearly tumbled into the street. His hands reached the ground before his face did. He pushed himself upright, his orange coveralls stained red, and looked around. A few hundred meters behind him was the security post, and a few hundred meters behind the security post was the prison. He could feel blood in his shoes and listen to his shackles jangle as he walked to the right side of the pod, the bullet holes indicating that he was on the side from which the shooters had attacked. He looked from the pod to the thick woods by the road, knew that he was helpless, and raised his hands. Am I next? Nobody responded. Sirens wailed in the distance. He kept his hands up. After a few seconds, he lowered them, looked away from the woods, and shuffled to the pod's cabin. He looked through the destroyed passenger window and saw that all the guards were dead. Vector was closest. Puddles of blood where his eyes used to be. His nose was gone, and the hole in his cheek might have explained why his jaw hung impossibly low. The sirens grew louder. He turned toward the sound coming from up the road and away from the stench in the cabin. He looked at the back of his hand, a drop of blood staining it and glowing under the light of the beige moons. He looked at the dead guards. The sirens sounded closer. He sent his gaze down the long, empty road from where the noise came. He looked at the guards again. Oh no. He whimpered at the thought of patrollers arriving and finding him amongst murdered guards. He hoped they would only beat him. He shook his head and eyed the road ahead, waiting for a blue light to appear on the horizon. With hands raised, he turned toward the forest. I say again, do y'all intend? A red spark appeared in the forest. He heard a pop. He gasped and looked at his feet. The chain shackling his ankles was broken. He flinched at the sound of an engine turning. He looked to his left. Just a few feet beyond the destroyed pod, a vehicle materialized, its cloaking device, its illegal cloaking device, having deactivated. Oh, hell no! His mouth dried. Sweat drenched his bloody prison uniform. The car's driver's side window dissolved. The journalist, Lacey Simmons, glared at him from the driver's seat, bearing her father's scowl. Kato, get in the car. He pursed his lips and took a deep, shaky breath. I'd rather lose a planet. He grumbled about her mean-ass, bitter-ass ways before again raising his hands and looking at the forest. Y'all gangers? Moonwall? 'Cause I ain't got nothing to do with... He saw another red spark, heard another pop, and felt a numbness in his chest. He fell forward intentionally, breaking his fall with his hands. Saliva extended from his bottom lip. His body was jittery, like he'd mainlined caffeine. And then he was weak. He could barely hold himself up. You shot me. Everything went dark.